Hello again, everybody. My name is John D. Healy. My podcast is called It's Good to Talk. Published this book a couple of years ago. I'm known for the book, and that's how it all started. By Stoney McGurn, born in 1941. Stories and parables up until a couple of years ago. My sponsor is Liffey Moving Company. They've been around many, many years, longer than Jeopardy. Okay, so let me move on to my guest today. My guest today is from Ireland. His name is Bryan Leyden. He is an Irish writer, a modern Irish writer, because we have lots of Irish writers in Ireland, but many of them have passed away. So let me start with Bryan. Bryan, just tell my listeners where you were born, and I will interrupt you to say I've read many of your books. Okay, but where were you born, Bryan, and how'd you get into writing?
Hello, John. It's lovely to chat to you. And again, actually, we've met before.
Yes.
Yes, I am originally from the coal mining valley of Arigna in County Roscommon. Sometimes it's actually thought to be in Leitrim because it's the tail end of County Roscommon there, but the coalfields of North Roscommon is where I'm from. I was born there and grew up there, and it would be an unusual place in the sense that you had small farming, hill farming community, and then you had industrial coal mines. Nothing on the scale now of Pennsylvania or places like that, but at the same time, it was slightly different to the usual. And my father was not actually a coal miner; he was a gardener who worked for the Leydens, not unfortunately the same family as myself. I always tried to prove I was a stolen child and entitled to something there, but no, they weren't having any of that. There were many Leydens. It was a common name in Roscommon actually at the time.
I know a lot of Leydens from the Sligo areas. I mean, a friend of mine, D. Leyden, for short for Damien Leyden, played in a show band. Now, I have had the privilege, and lucky me, again, because I consider myself lucky always, I read 3 of your books. I read the Home Place. I really, really enjoyed that book. It's a beautiful book, kind of sad and happy, but a very nice book, nicely written. I would recommend that to my listeners. My favorite of the 3 I read is a book you wrote called Summer of '63. And that book was kind of catchy because it drew you in thinking it was all about John F. Kennedy and the assassination. And it wasn't. That was just a way to get you in the door and start reading it. And I really enjoyed it because I could connect with it. Your first television, the family bought, and so on and so forth. I won't give the story away. And the third book was a mix of a lot of stories, some from New York and some from Ireland. So I read all 3 of those. So the reason for my interview today is a friend of ours, James Dennison, sent me a copy of a script of a play called The Sheemore Ambush, and very apt because of many reasons of the 1960 rising in Dublin and stories from the IRA, whom I consider to be probably the best army in the world, but I don't want to get too political or I'll get thrown off YouTube. And indeed, with the war going on today in Ukraine and Russia, where many similar tactics will, I'm sure, come into play. Bryan, talk to us about the Sheemore ambush. Was this commissioned or?
Yes, John, happy to talk to you about that. Yes, there's an entire sort of project underway. It's a decade of commemoration project from, it runs from about up to 2023, and
from 1916, I assume.
Yes, and they're looking at the whole kind of evolution of Ireland, its freedom, and and how it became a republic, and indeed the Civil War. So if there's a decade of commemorations going on at the moment. This was part of that commission. And I was approached by Edwina Gucking, who will be familiar to your fans, John, because she's a tremendous dancer. She's won all kinds of awards. She's multi-talented, and she also had the commission to sort of steward or oversee a bunch of projects connected with commemorating the War of Independence in County Leitrim. One of the major significant events in County Leitrim was the Sheemore ambush. It was, by any standard, a very successful ambush by what were essentially farmers up against the might of the British Empire, trained soldiery, and a particularly new regiment that had come in. There was a mix of soldiers, black and tans, constabulary, up against a small bunch of farmers who had banded themselves into what were known as the flying columns. These flying columns were groups of men who never stayed in one house over too long, maybe a couple of nights, and then kept on the run. There was a chain of safe houses for them, and these were often overseen by the women. They were kept with knitted socks, food, clothes, and there was even a little bit of entertainment, maybe a door taken off its hinges and a dance held in a field with watches kept lookout. And that was a particular appeal to Edwina. So when Edwina came to me, she had an historian, Mr. McGorty, who had researched the facts. And she said, could you humanize this? We know this is a military, it's a significant historic event, but what about the people? So as a writer, what I did was I took the historic information and I created the characters. These are not the people themselves, but I do use their own words where they're on record as saying things, but I gave each of them a character and an identity, and I tried to humanize the whole thing. And that included looking at it from both the Irish Republican side, the soldiers participating in the ambush, and the man who died, Lieutenant Eric Chilcott Wilson. And another unusual character, this Nurse Alice Gray, she was actually a first of a very new thing that was happening, because as you pointed out rightly, John, there was a guerrilla war going on. There was new tactics evolving, and part of that was to use women to carry intelligence, weapons, other things. And, the gallantry of the old way of fighting war didn't allow male soldiers to strip or search women soldiers. So a woman searcher was employed, this Nurse Alice Gray, and she was there on the spot that day. So it gave me a chance to view a very male incident from a woman's perspective. There would also be one of the most heroic people involved in the ambush. You had 9 men in the party. The soldiery mistook them for at least 20. They were so effective in their gunfire. And they ambushed from the side of Sheemore Hill a collection of army tenders and trucks that had been lured out by false intelligence out to Gower Church, and on the return journey they were waiting to ambush them, including the searcher. And the fire broke out. They were able to actually take pot shots, as the lieutenant said later, because they made a dreadful mistake going back the way they came. And this allowed the ambush to take place. So I look at it from all sides, including at the conclusion of the ambush. In the thick of the fire, bullets were bouncing about the place. A chip of stone hit one of the men. It looked like he'd been shot, but it was only a graze, and he used a handkerchief to dab away the blood. Later it was discovered the handkerchief was missing. And of course, the Black and Tans and the British soldiery could have used tracker dogs, if they found the handkerchief, lead them to the safe houses they'd been using, and with their blood up, the Black and Tans would have shot everybody, men, women, children, the ambushers. It wouldn't have mattered to them to get revenge for what was.
They were not nice guys.
Yes, so they were not. They were hardened, and we might say they were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, because many of them would have fought in the First World War, seen pretty horrible things, and were hardened in a way that maybe ordinary Leitrim farmers weren't. So they could have expected the worst. Only they got in touch with a Common Amon member, a young woman. She was only 18, and she volunteered to cycle back through the thick of the joint, through the checkpoints, through all of that, to retrieve the handkerchief. So in some ways, she rescued the day and perhaps did one of the bravest acts of the entire ambush. So again, it was nice to get that woman's perspective into what was a very military story.
My guest today is Brian Leyden, an famous Irish writer now, and has done this play, The Sheemore Ambush. 3 things come up there, Brian, that you mentioned very eloquently. Manon, Hearden, Common Navan. The Irish women were so courageous and really were a backbone. And I may add, still to this day, a lot of Irish women I know are the backbone of Irish society. We had the first president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, from my own County Mayo, Mary from Ballina, fought heroic battles in her own way for many, many, many civil rights through the court system. And the other thing you mentioned there was training. And my background is marketing. People know me from Mother Hubbard's, a restaurant. I'm not a chef, I'm not a cook. I'm a marketing guy over and over. But I know the importance of training. And listeners, training is vital in any business. Whether you're a carpenter, a bartender, a chef, a cook, or whatever it is that you do, your training is going to be what you are about. And if you're not trained, you will fall like a fallen soldier who was only handed a gun and with no instructions how to load it and how to fire it. So I got the training in, I got Minona Hearden in. So, Brian, have you anything else to add to our topic? And then I'm going to add the Sheemore ambush to our chat today, our podcast. My guest, Bryan Leyden, it's good to talk, and it is good to talk. And the Sheemore ambush is 14 minutes, but it's very, very, extremely well done. I must say, excellently well done. It brings the Sheemore ambush to light. And I know we see enough war on television today, sadly. And I always say about love and war, easy to start and hard to end. Brian, anything to add today?
Yes, I would say that obviously it's very distressing what's happening in the Ukraine, and people are seeing the most ghastly images of war and what we experienced in Ireland under Cromwell, what might be called a scorched earth policy being used against an ordinary population. What I would like to emphasize with the Sheemore ambush is that I do try, and if you watch it, you'll see the most beautiful imagery of Leitrim, which Arigna has captured on camera. And I think I hope it has a tenderness and a human story behind the actual facts of history and the violence. There's a beautiful saying, which it relates to almost. It said that if history tells us what happened, the songs we sing tell us what people felt about what happened. This is what people felt about what happened, I hope.
Excellent. I, as we speak, I'm actually in the middle of reading a book by another Irish writer like yourself. This is from Fintan O'Toole, We Don't Know Ourselves. And Fintan actually touches in on a lot of the same. Yeah. Because we're experiencing, like, from Mayo up to Dublin and in between, and Leitrim and Roscommon and so forth, it affected everybody. We know of the evictions of Irish farmers and their little plots of ground, which were basically, as you said at the start of the interview, they were just small farms that were self-sufficient. You had a few cows, a few hens, a few geese, a few ducks. You just basically survived. But it was idyllic in a way, coming back to the scenery of Roscommon and Leitrim and all that. I mean, in one way we were blessed, in one way we were blessed, and in more than one we were blessed. And then, unfortunately, we were cursed in other ways. Like our language, I speak my Gaelic language, was beaten out of us, literally. But I'll say thanks to the British for that we probably speak better English than the English themselves. Brian, anything before I sign off?
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, and I hope people will get a richer understanding of perhaps the nuanced history of combat at a time when, as you said, John, this was the making of the Irish Republic. These were young farmers who went out and took on the forces of the crown, a massive empire like the Russian Empire, yep, and actually won their freedom. So it's a hopeful story.
Brian, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today, and good to see you again. And keep the writing up.
Thank you,
They say the pen is stronger than the sword.